Members, I'm going to call the Jobs and Economic Development, Finance, and Policy Committee to order today. And we have a couple of bills up today. But I think, do we have minutes? No, we don't have minutes from before. So we're going to go right to the bills. This is kind of good. This is really a bill that I'm excited to hear about. House File 2536 is the Women's Economic Security Act, carried by Representative Carla Melin. And I'm not sure if the whole legislature doesn't know, but I have two daughters, and I think this is pretty important for them and for all the other women in this world. So, without further ado, I would like to move House File 2536 be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if we could move the delete all amendment right away, just
So moved.
the bill in the form I'd like.
I think Representative Savick has moved the DE1 amendment. Is there any conversation in order to get it into the shape that the author would prefer? Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of the DE1 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Bill's in the shape that you would like.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And it's a privilege to be here today to discuss the Women's Economic Security Act. And I'd like to start out by saying that the DE amendment that was just adopted by the committee encompasses 7 different bills that have traveled through the legislature. So I certainly, through the committee process, so I certainly don't want to take all the credit for what's in front of you, as I was the only author of one of those bills. And the other authors include Representative Morgan, Representative Rosenthal, Representative Seltzer, Representative Kahn, Representative Yaruso, and Representative Mason, and as well as a bill that was carried by me. And those bills are now encompassed into the Women's Economic Security Act. So I just want to give credit where credit is due, that those authors have been working hard this session to move those bills through the committee process, and now we are here today to discuss the Women's Economic Security Act. And Mr. Chair, I just want to give a brief overview of what pieces are in the Women's Economic Security Act, and then go to the testifiers to sort of talk about how we got here today. The first piece that's in is regarding nursing mothers, Representative Kahn bill. And it provides an enforcement mechanism for this law that has been on the books since the mid-'80s, requiring employers to make reasonable accommodations to provide breastfeeding mothers to pump or nurse while at work. A second piece of the Women's Economic Security Act would be protecting caregivers from workplace discrimination. Caregiving status is a major trigger for negative stereotypes that can impact employment opportunities, and this bill does not require employers to accommodate caregivers. It just requires them to treat them like every other employee. Unemployment benefits for victims of sexual assault and stalking, Representative Rosenthal bill. 1 in 3 women, unfortunately, are the victim of domestic or sexual violence by midlife. And this violence has significant economic consequences for these women and for their families. Current law allows victims of domestic violence to access unemployment benefits that can create economic stability for the victims. And this bill gives that same opportunity to victims of sexual violence that victims of domestic violence already have in current law. Another piece is the pregnancy and parenting leave. The income of pregnant women is increasingly important to families, as most pregnant women are working until they deliver. And this bill requires employers with more than 21 employees to provide temporary, minor, reasonable accommodations, such as more frequent bathroom breaks, accessibility to water, and reasonable accommodations such as if your job involves heavy lifting, to accommodate and provide other opportunities for the female employee. And this bill also adds 12 weeks of parental leave as opposed to 6 weeks, which is the current law in Minnesota. Federal law is 12 weeks, so this is mirroring that and allowing 12 weeks for the parental leave. Another piece, Mr. Chair and members, is the Women in Non-Traditional Work Bill. A significant portion of our pay gap here in Minnesota is attributable to women and men doing different work and the higher value placed on work that men do. This bill adds a women in non-traditional work perspective to the Governor's Workforce Developmental Council. It creates a new grant program designed to increase efforts to recruit, train, place, and retain women in high-wage, high-growth, non-traditional occupations. And provides funding to the Department of Labor and Industry. And of course, I represent a region of the state that is dominated by industry, which and jobs that are traditionally held by men. And while women are making some roads into the workplace, we certainly have more work to do, and we think that that's an important piece to grow on. Also, as a women entrepreneurs in high-impact industries, this bill supports organizations helping women start businesses in higher revenue sectors. And then finally, Mr. Chair and members, would be the wage disclosure. We're all, I think, familiar with the Lilly Ledbetter Act that passed in 2009 at the federal level. This is somewhat similar, our own little state version, to the Lilly Ledbetter Act to allow women, allow employees to voluntarily disclose their wages so their colleagues know whether or not they're being paid equally, and then protection of retaliation for disclosing those wages. And so with that, and the discussing of the pieces that are in the bill, I think I'll turn it over to Ms. Fitzpatrick, who can describe how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Representative Colleen.
Actually, I'd like to let Kim Borton start for briefly, and then I'll take over.
Certainly. Ms. Borton, please identify yourself for the tape and proceed.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kim Borton, and I'm the Director of Programs for the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the committee today and for your consideration of the bill. The Women's Foundation is a statewide community foundation that invests in social change for equality for all women and girls in the state. Through annual grant making, we invest over $2 million a year to nonprofits and communities across our state. And about 50% of those dollars are invested in greater Minnesota. We also conduct research, drive public policy, and build women's philanthropy. And we're thrilled to be a key partner in the Women's Economic Security Act. Our research, The Status of Women and Girls in Minnesota, which I believe is included in your packets today, was completed in partnership with the Humphrey School's Center of Women in Public Policy. And it served as the basis for the women's economic security legislation. Deb Fitzpatrick, director of the center, shortly will provide you highlights of the economic section of that research. We do this research to understand what's occurring in the lives of women and girls in every region of our state. It also focuses our annual grant making at the foundation and informs our public policy agenda. We support the status research with our biennial Road to Equality tour. And on this statewide listening tour, we conduct focus groups across the state to see how the data is reflected in the real lives of women, their families, and communities they live in. During our last tour, we visited 10 communities across the state, and every one of them named issues directly related to economics as their #1 community priority. Minnesotans spoke about the lack of well-paying jobs and the gender wage gap. We also learned that elderly and aging women are experiencing isolation and invisible poverty. Overall, Minnesotans reported that the lack of opportunities for women who need hope and access to resources in order to move their lives forward. And what came through loud and clear for us is that women, families, and communities across our state need pathways to prosperity, not pathways to poverty. So take, for example, a story we heard about Ginger living in northern Minnesota. When she arrived at the Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency, Ginger was a high school dropout, worked a minimum wage job, and had little hope for her future. However, after receiving the training, education, and graduating from the agency's welding program, it's a program that we fund at the foundation, Ginger landed a job in her field that pays her $20 an hour, plus benefits. And now she has a hope for a future and is inspiring other women to follow in her footsteps. At the Women's Foundation, we know that when women thrive, so do their families and our communities. The Women's Economic Security Act and the bills before you today help women like Ginger in all communities across our state. Thank you for your consideration and your support.
Thank you, Ms. Borton. Ms. Borton. Ms. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Representative Melin, thank you for the opportunity to share some of the research background and rationale for the Women's Economic Security Act. Three major economic, demographic, and social trends are converging to create a new normal in the state that makes the provisions of this package essential. First of all, the earnings of...
Patrick, could I ask you to identify yourself for the tape?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Deborah Fitzpatrick, direct the Center on Women and Public Policy at the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota. So the first of these trends is the earnings of women in Minnesota are increasingly important to their families' well-being. 50% of the state's working mothers are now a primary breadwinner for their family as the sole earner or earning more than a spouse. Minnesota leads the nation in women's workforce participation. Women here, more than other places in the country, are an integral part of the productivity of our state. A second trend is our population is aging, and care for elderly is moving out of institutions and back into our homes, creating additional caregiving needs. And the third trend is workers are staying in the workforce longer, and that means fewer and fewer women available to continue the often unrecognized and undervalued unpaid caregiving that keeps many families functioning. Now, these combined trends are putting incredible stress on our families, and unfortunately, women are bearing a significant part of the burden. Expected to and trying mightily to continue as primary caregivers in our society and in our families, as well as increasingly being primary breadwinners. And while women have stepped up to play their role in our economy, leaning in as best they can for themselves and their families, recognizing that they may have to work twice as hard to prove themselves, getting degrees at higher levels than men, none of this has resulted in economic parity. Now, one might, and some do, argue that it's just a matter of time. But the fact is, progress has stalled out at best, and with little change in the pay gap or the percent of women in leadership or the level of violence against women for the past decade. And we're actually moving in a reverse on some measures, with more women in poverty and fewer in computing. The pay gap, which is stuck at about 20%, that is women earning 80% of what men do on average, is sort of a global measure of equity. 4 overlapping factors contribute to the pay gap, and the bills in this package are designed to address all of these in a comprehensive way. First of all, women earn less for the same job here in Minnesota and across the country. Women are paid less than men in nearly every occupation. Economists have documented the role of gender bias in employment decisions through studies and a vast and robust body of research. And to close the wage gap, we must address this particular issue. Job segregation, which Representative Melin did a great job of outlining. Sex role stereotypes lead to women being segregated in female-dominated jobs that pay less and are often part-time. Minnesota women make up nearly 2/3 of our low-wage workers, and jobs considered to be women's work typically pay less than male-dominated jobs requiring equivalent skill and effort. And women remain underrepresented in higher-paying work traditionally done by men. The next category that contributes is retaliation against workers for discussing their pay. Today, a majority of employees report that they are either prohibited or actively discouraged from discussing their wages. Employers with policies preventing employees from sharing pay information keep women in the dark about pay differences and limit their ability to negotiate for higher pay and to enforce their rights under the equal pay laws. And finally, pay reductions or lower pay levels are due to pregnancy and caregiving responsibilities. Some employers do pay women less from the moment of hire and deny them promotions because they automatically presume all women will have children and then will be less committed to their jobs. If women do get pregnant or take on caregiving responsibilities, they sometimes lose their income because of overt or unconscious discrimination based on these stereotypes. They also also lose pay when they are deprived of opportunities to advance to higher paid jobs or pushed out of work altogether because of employer assumptions or an unwillingness to accommodate reasonable and minor needs that may arise for women as a result of pregnancy or nursing. Stereotypes and negative assumptions can also impact men who take on caregiving responsibilities and step outside our gendered norms about who caregivers and workers are supposed to be. And before I end, I just want to say a word about the assumptions and testimony that this package is bad for business. We hear a lot about the costs of equitable policies to businesses, but research actually shows that there are many benefits for businesses, even small ones and rural ones, who invest in and treat their women employees equitably. For these businesses, such as the one who will testify in a few minutes, and C&M Motor Sales, you have a letter in your packets from them, these kind of employers who are doing the right things to support employees and their families, for them, this package actually levels the playing field. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our other testifiers.
Representative Melin, I actually have, I think, 3 amendments that I would like to offer to your bill. They are the A2, and this is the order I'll offer them. The A2, the A1, and the A3, and that really gets the bill into the shape that that you and I have talked about. And one of them is brought to me by deed. So I'd like to offer the A2 amendment, and I'll wait till everybody can find it, which is being offered to you. Delete all. Everyone's found that. What we're talking about here is trying to insert the word high wage, high demand, and give more definition to what that means, and then replace or insert high wage, high demand in a variety of places. So, Representative Melin, do you like the chair's amendment?
Mr. Chair, I love your amendments. I've had a chance to review the A1, A2, and A3 amendments, and I would ask the committee to adopt them.
Well, we're going to adopt the A2. We'll do them one at a time. So the A2 is before us. Is there any discussion? Any discussion?
Right there.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to your point, and this is just a point of clarification so that I think I understand and maybe the others, could you just elaborate for the benefit of myself what lines 1.7 through 1.10 practically mean?
By Representative Albright, by practical, do you mean what type of jobs they're going to be doing?
Thank you, sir.
I can't give you a... Well, I suspect it might be a pipe fitter. You know, that's a pretty good wage job. Could be a financial planner if they do their job right.
Amen to that.
Actually, that particular, that's more of an income. And I would probably call down, Deed might be able to give us what that dollar figure is, but it's more likely than not we'd have to get it from their labor market. So I'm going to suspect that it's above $50,000 to $60,000 a year.
I would be willing to ask Dee that question.
Certainly. If Dee has the answer, please come on down. Ms. Babine, nice to see you again. Please identify yourself for the tape and see if you can answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kim Babine, I am the Director of Government Affairs at DEED. Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Representative, you were looking for what the definition of high wage or what kind of dollar figure that would be? Is that, I couldn't quite hear your question.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking for a practical way of appreciating what lines 1.7 through line 1.1 would objectively mean to an employer.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chair, Representative, I don't have the exact kind of salary or what else that would entail right right now. This definition comes from our Labor Market Information Office and is what they use to define these. We have high wage, high demand. We have occupation lists that they keep track of and watch the labor market data so that they can see where those are. So this matches that data and would then be consistent. But I can get that information for you.
Ms. Babine, would you please get that information to the committee, and then we'll share it with all of the members? But my suspicion is that it's a way more than a living wage job.
I just have follow-ups.
Right, Representative Albright.
Thank you. And to the testifier, on line 1.9, it suggests which is higher than the average for the current year. Are we codifying a cost of living adjustment inflator into, from year to year on a rolling basis, what high wage, high demand might infer?
I like it.
Just asking the question, sir.
Ms. Babine.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I don't know that was the intent. I would have to, or if that would be what the consequence would be. Again, this is the definition I have from my labor market information, so I'll have to go back and get more information.
Mr. Chair, I think, obviously we talk a lot about words have meaning, and I would appreciate if we could get follow-up from Deed on those 2 points.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Babine, would you provide that to the committee and so that we can share it with all the members of the committee? This bill is, I believe, heading off to Ways and Means, and then it's got rules, and then it'll get to the floor. And if we have any problems, I don't really like, and I don't think any of us like to make repairs in Ways and Means or on the floor, but if there's something we have to do, we can certainly take care of it there.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All those in favor of the A2 amendment, well, is there any other conversation, any other? Okay, seeing none. No, seeing none. All those in favor of the A2 amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. The A2 is part of your bill. Now we're going to take up an A1 and an A1 amendment. And actually, I'm going to take up the A3, which is an amendment to the A1. Can I do that?
Go the other way around.
The other way around. So we'll take up the A1 amendment. I'll move the A1 amendment. And what this does, this is the Women's Entrepreneur Business Development Appropriation. And in Representative Melin, this was Representative Seltzer's bill. And what it did is a competitive grant program for organizations that help women entrepreneurs in high-wage STEM-type jobs and starting businesses. My concern with starting a competitive grant, this committee, we did a great job last year, both sides of the aisle. The economy is roaring, and we're kind of trying to add a little bit more with some of this. And I didn't want to wait till November before the checks rolled out or December. So I went with the track record of a couple of really good organizations that have done great work in the past and made it a direct appropriation to those two organizations. One here in the Twin Cities and one up in the Arrowhead. So it is Women Ventures and the Economic Development Agency, and I guess I might have gotten the name wrong, but we're going to check on that, and that might be a repair we'll have to do.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and I think you could do it through oral amendment, would be just my suggestion, change Arrowhead Economic Development Agency to Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency.
Did staff get that, and could you read that back?
Mr. Chair, the amendment would be on line 1.8. You would delete development and insert opportunity.
Everyone got that particular one? Although, is there any discussion about that oral amendment? Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. All right. So, the amendment, the A1 amendment makes this a $500,000 grant split equally between the two agencies, and it follows a lot of what the other bill did, other than just how that money went out. And 51% female-owned. I think Ms. Wyatt, when it was first brought forth, testified there's a federal definition. Management and daily operations controlled by women, organized for a profit, is projected to generate at least $500,000 in annual revenue. Those are all pieces that were in the original bill. It lists on page 2, line 1, the amendment lists the places where these monies are to be placed trying to start new businesses. And then on line 2.4, the grant award under this section does not affect any other grant award or appropriation made to a grant recipient. And that is because we have the deed has a rule that if you get a grant, you can't get a direct appropriation. If you get a direct appropriation, you can't get a grant. We are trying to push this relatively quickly and get the economy and help women start businesses, so that's in there. So before we do the A1 amendment, I'm going to offer the A3 amendment, and now I'll explain this one. On the A3, line 1.2, where we delete "and is available." Now what that does is says that this money is available until July 1st? June 30th? June 30th, 2015, which means that this money needs to be used this year. We're not sitting there, we don't want this to go into their budget and kind of be lost. And then this grants up to 10% of each award may be used for administrative costs. That's a little higher than we normally do, but I did check with both organizations and with DEED, and that seemed reasonable from both organizations and from DEED. So not being a person who understands administrative costs all that well, I went to the experts. So all those in favor, is there any discussion on the A3 amendment? Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pardon my voice still. I'm just
kind of
curious.
hoping it'd get worse, but
It's getting better. I'm just curious on, you went to the experts, but we're letting the experts tell us what their administrative costs should be. Why are we, isn't there a model for this someplace else that tell us what might be a more accurate number? Not that people would try to pad their administrative costs, but it could happen.
well, yes. There was a number that was given that was significantly higher than this. It was about 20%, and I basically cut it in half. So the 10%, we keep every year. We have one of the agencies come back and say we didn't give them enough for their administrative costs. I just don't want this organization to get, these two organizations to get into a bind trying to get this money out. So I went with I took their number and sat down with DEED and went over the numbers with DEED, and they suggested 10%. So they are better at it than I am. Representative
Thank you,
Fabian.
Mr. Chair. Well, just two things real quickly. We passed the LIHEAP bill a couple of weeks ago, and we put a cap on the administrative expenses there at 5%. And I'm not exactly sure how that number was arrived at. I do have some questions about supporting data to get to the 10%, and I appreciate that DEED has been involved in this, but at the same time, I think as a committee we should be doing our fiscal due diligence and make sure that we have some supporting data upon which to make that decision. And maybe that's something that could be hashed out at a committee meeting beyond here, but that's just my thought.
Representative Fabian, did you have any ideas of what you might like to know about?
Just some supporting data for their excuse me, Mr. Chair, just some supporting data for why they said 20 and you said 10, and quite frankly, did they submit anything to you in writing? Have you got anything from them, or was it just in conversations? What did they express to you?
I believe they had a conversation with Deed. I don't have anything in writing, per se. But the conversation I had was staff, rent. They'll have to assign a part of rent, part of staff, part of bookkeeping, and those particulars to this particular grant. The typical, paper clips, copying that particular stuff. So I can certainly ask them to bring some of those numbers a little closer, to see if that gets it closer to it, give a little bit more data, but that's about what I can do to answer that particular question, and I'll get that for you.
I guess my final point would be, Mr. Chair, if I may, is if we're going to do this, I'd like to get as many dollars out into the hands of where we want it to be, rather than keeping it tied up in the bureaucracy. Thank you.
I agree. Representative Norton.
Mr. Chair, my question is to the A1, so if you want to finish with the A3 and then go back to the A1, I can hold.
Representative Albright, did you have an A3 amendment question?
A comment and a question for the chair. Actually, from a venture capital perspective, and this may allay the concern or the issue on the 10%, that's actually, in the opinion of experience I had, that's actually low. It's usually in a startup much, much greater, to the extent of maybe 3 and 4 times that. So just a warning on that. But then to my question, Mr. Chair, in terms of, as you would describe administrative costs, my understanding that would include overhead burden, rent, light, heat, payroll, benefits, the whole benefit, or not benefit package, but a whole overhead burden. If you just would be willing to describe what that word would define itself as?
Representative Albright,
Marketing.
I'm going to guess that is I would have to say marketing, overhead, as you described it, rent, lights, staff. Both these organizations, I believe, got something in the competitive grant program. So we're actually just building on. They have the infrastructure at hand, and we're just allowing them more money and building on that particular administrative cost. So most of that was picked up with the competitive grant dollars. Okay. And both these organizations do private fundraising and other grant writing. So it's all part of that.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on the A3 amendment, all those in favor of the A3 amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? A3 is on. Having done that, Representative Norton on the A1 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to approach this very carefully so that I don't irritate the chair. And
that's always good.
I know. And or women, because I know it is hard. So it's thank you for that advice, but I'm going to go on. Because I think this is an important area, obviously, and I represent, and I really respect Representative Melin for bringing this forward and the other authors who are trying to do similarly. In this particular area, and many on this committee know, that we've worked really hard to keep grants as grants and not do direct appropriations. So I'm going to start by saying, as I read line 1.10, we're talking about a grant, rather, because I was trying to, how can I justify that it's okay to do this today when I'm one of the ones who stands in this committee and says we do not do this. We go through a grant process at the department. And so I was trying to justify in my head that this was a program, not a grant. And then, of course, on line 1.10 it says grant. So that sort of shot that down. So I would like you to help me decide how I can vote yes for this when I am as strong an advocate for what we've been trying to do, which is get away from this. And it's not support for the program, it's support for the way we're doing it right now. And then so before I give you the microphone to yell at me, I will also mention, as I'm looking in the 1.19, when it describes eligible women-owned businesses, that I have had some people complain to me that they believe that the law is being skirted in the community by businesses who really are not owned by women, that are using it as a shell in order to get access to additional funds. And so I just wondered if there was someone who could help me understand how they assure that doesn't happen, and that it really is going to women-owned and entrepreneur women activities. And then if you could help me with this grant versus program and why we're violating our own rules, please.
Representative Norton, I know that the Executive Director of Women Ventures is here, and she spoke to this in our first hearing, so I would ask that Ms. Wyatt come to the witness table for a minute to explain that particular piece, the women-owned and minority-owned, and the grant versus competitive grant versus appropriation. Really, I don't want to, as I said earlier, I don't want this money to sit over a deed and for 3, 6, 8 months. This is a one-time appropriation. I believe that this is important to get this out to the community, whether it's up in Hibbing or Duluth, or I think the Arrowhead goes down to Pine County, and I'm not entirely sure where Women Ventures goes statewide. I want this money out now, and I want women to start really stepping forward and creating their own companies. So you don't have to bother about beating me up. There's already been a number of people in my office beating me up about this, and I'm sure they will all summer long.
Okay, and so, Mr. Chair, I've made this, and I'm interested in the answer, and it was a great hearing that we've had on this already, and they did a great job, but I am going to be a purist on this, and so I will be voting against your amendment because this is something we've worked long and hard on, and I just want to be really clear. It's not that I don't think they're great programs and good ideas. I do, very much. I enjoyed the hearing. It was wonderful, but I really can't work really hard to put something in place to dole the money out in a fair way with ROI and all those things we've asked, and then turn around and do a direct appropriation, even if it's something that I think is super valuable. So I just want to be really clear. It's not that I don't support the projects and I don't support the initiatives. I absolutely do, but we have turned down lots of really wonderful people in the last couple years, and so I'm just going to be consistent. And you can give me dagger looks. It's okay.
Consistency, always interesting. Ms. Wyatt.
Representative, Mr. Chair, the answer to that question is that the businesses that we launch that would be eligible for this money, if we happen to be fortunate to be the organization that would get it, would be certified by the Women's Business Development Center. That is a 9-state organization that certifies women-owned businesses. It's a very rigorous process. They actually visit the business. They will drop by to make sure that the woman is actually present and running the business. And it's a very in-depth certification that's renewed annually. So that's how we would make sure that that happened for these businesses. Thank you for that.
So, Ms. Wyatt, if I might ask, do they have a kind of an outline of what that process is, or and if so, could you pass that along to the committee administrator, and we can get it to the rest of the committee?
Mr. Chair, they do, and I can do that.
Thank you so very much. Representative Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just happy to tell you that not only am I delighted to vote for this because it's the right thing to do, I'm also delighted that we're breaking from the process of competitive grants. And I'll be remembering that as a precedent for later. Thank you.
He will.
Yeah, that doesn't matter too much. Ms. Wyatt, before you leave, I think there's another question for you. Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so as I was reading through this amendment, and Representative Melin, maybe you can help me with that as well. Women Venture and Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency are going to perhaps oversee the... Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Women Venture and Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency, maybe the fiscal agents of the grants. Do you have a statewide network? Is this going to be a statewide network? I heard the chair say something about Arrowhead Economic Opportunity goes down to Pine County. I'm familiar with Arrowhead Economic Opportunity up in the Duluth area. I don't know if they have a statewide network. and Women Venture, do they have a statewide network? That's my question.
Ms. Wyatt?
Representative, Mr. Chair, what we plan on, intend to do with these funds is to actually work actively with the small business development centers that are throughout the state in order to execute the funds. We would most likely work south of St. Cloud, and I would imagine that the Arrowhead group would work north of St. Cloud.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question, and I asked the author, and she didn't know. So I'm just wondering, are there other women economic development organizations within DEED that were considered for this, or just is this one, these two?
Within DEED? No.
That are funded. I mean, that are funded by DEED.
That are funded by DEED? I asked DEED to make some suggestions, and I asked them for the most robust, widest network organizations. And these were the two organizations that they came up with. Now, if we want to go to a competitive grant program, which we certainly can, which is the other way we would have to go, again, this money likely would not be in to help women start businesses until December or January. And that's really unacceptable with this kind of money for 1 year. But
Mr. Chairman, I'm not objecting to what you're doing with doing a non-competitive grant. I just wanted to know, because I know there are other organizations within it too, and I don't know how one compares to the other. And if this is a recommendation of DEED, is what you're telling me? Okay, thank you.
yes, it is. Representative Fabian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As concerned as people are about the Arrowhead and Pine County and St. Cloud and these areas, I'm also concerned about Kitson County. Are there any provisions in the bill, in the amendment, and I don't see them, that requires some kind of report back to the committee as to where these dollars are spent?
Representative Fabian, no, they would be going back to DEED. DEED has done a competitive grant with these particular organizations, and they have to report back to DEED. So we can certainly ask DEED, and then DEED does a report back to the committee, both the chair and the minority lead, and we can certainly get you those reports. Women Ventures has been reported upon for many years. The Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency has reported back to DEED numerous times. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to that point, with the Women's Venture, is there data available to us as to where the dollars have gone in the past in similar types of programs around the state of Minnesota?
Representative Fabian, I don't have that here, but we can certainly get that for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we can get that. I know DEED has records on it. I'm sure Ms. Wyatt will get it to us and get it to us before this probably gets to the floor without any questions. So we'll have that for you.
I'm concerned about your golden crescent.
I am too, but I lost that fight. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this would go to the author. I'm unfamiliar with the overall mission of the Arrowhead Economic Development Agency. And so for those that have not been privy to that explanation in the past, I'm just wondering if you would indulge us with an explanation in terms of what that organization does, how long it's been in existence, its objectives, its goals, its success stories.
Mr. Chair and Representative Albright, I don't have those sort of details in front of me. They've been around for decades. They're an economic opportunity agency. They do a number of different things, but what they would be doing with this money is what's outlined in the original bill and in the amendment. They're also have for a number of years and right now are actively working on getting women into non-traditional high-income jobs. That's something that they've worked on for quite some time and will be working on going forward and again within the parameters of this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to that point, and this may be for a question for the Chair, but would both of these organizations, if they are following under the auspices and jurisdiction of DEED, would they also then be accountable under, should House File 2976 be passed, for the accountability measures that we talked about in that bill here a couple days ago?
Yes, they would.
That's all I need to know.
Seeing no further discussion and no notes that I read. All those in favor of the A1 amendment as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign?
No.
Sure.
Aye.
I think we have one more amendment. Now, it's the A5 amendment, and Representative Keefer is going to offer that particular amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I officially offer this, I wanted to just give some kudos to Rep. Melin. You're a strong and capable legislator, and you're really carrying some heavy bills this session. Very impressive. And I stand next to you on a lot of those. Medical marijuana, I agree with your mining stance up north. I think we also voted the same way on civil marriage because I saw some inequities in our laws. So when I'm speaking about this bill, it's not politics. It's true concerns that I have, and I want to make sure that this bill is ready for prime time. It doesn't have bad unintended consequences in the long run. We've seen do-overs already in this session, so I don't want to have to see a do-over on this bill as well. So I thank you very much for considering what the other stakeholders have in this and listening and amending the bill. I thank you very much for that. And I think you are considering the unintended consequences of certain provisions. So on the A5, I'm looking at page 10, and this has to do with the pregnancy accommodations. And of course, this bill was heard in another committee that I was in earlier, the Labor Committee. So at this point, I would actually, Mr. Chair, like to ask Ms. Stratton a question about this amendment, or should we see if we can pass the amendment first or discuss it, or?
Well, I think we should have a conversation about it unless you want to go right to a vote.
No, I would like to ask Ms. Stratton, Ms. Lisa Stratton? Is she here? Stratton? Stratton, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. Nice to have you at the committee. Please identify yourself for the tape, and I'm going to call on Representative Keefer now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Stratton. You know, like I said, we vetted this bill already in one committee, and I guess my question is, do you have a problem, because I don't see in the current bill anything about undue hardship on the employer. So I'm wondering why that's not included in this bill right now. And that's what my amendment is going to do, is provide that provision. Thank you.
Identify yourself for the tape and answer away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Keefer. I'm Lisa Stratton. I'm a founder and currently executive director of Gender Justice. We work on cases representing individual women in Minnesota, and that's how we came to be involved with the pregnancy and nursing and particular protections, and trying to find ways to improve our laws in those areas where we have identified a gap. And on your question is about why isn't there an undue burden defense in the current draft in the House of this statute. And I have testified in other committees and in the Senate that I think importing an undue burden analysis into this law is unnecessary and overly complicates the law. I think it will be confusing because the term, as the advocates for the use of the term say, it is used in other statutes like the Family and Medical Leave Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Both of those laws can require much more serious and costly and permanent adjustments in jobs or accommodations. They can require an employer to purchase expensive equipment. They are solving a different problem than this law, which is intended to fill the gap they leave in not covering the ordinary, everyday needs of women who happen to be pregnant and want to continue to work as long as possible in their pregnancy. And that's what this bill is designed to deal with. It's designed to provide a practical, common-sense solution, just requiring employers to do what's reasonable. It isn't that the concepts behind an undue burden analysis, as it would be called under these other statutes, don't apply. They perfectly well apply as part of reasonableness. You know, if it is something that would be considered an undue burden, certainly it's not reasonable. But I don't think we need to import an entire body of case law that applies to these permanent, serious medical condition in the case of the FMLA, or permanent disability under the ADA. Is it just a different scheme, and we would make it needlessly complex.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I would like to know if there's anyone in the room that would like to speak to this and maybe give us another perspective on it.
We have some opponents from the Chamber of Commerce, and they're going to be coming up shortly. Would you prefer to have them right now?
Well, Mr. Chair, every other public accommodation law has this in it. It does the verbiage. And so I just really want to make sure, like I said, that we have this bill in proper form before we have to vote on it in the House floor. So, because I would like to see the A5 be accepted in this committee, and I don't think we can vote on it without fully understanding both sides of the issue.
Members, we have about 30 minutes left. I have 9 testifiers to go. Each testifier will get about 3 minutes. So, Kadun.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Beth Kadun. I represent the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. We had been working with the advocates on this language, so I really appreciate the amendment that was moved. Certainly something we're supportive. Just regarding the undue hardship language, our whole point behind trying to hopefully work and clean up the language is to really make sure we can make sure that the rights and responsibilities under the statute are as clear as possible. We're trying to remove kind of excess litigation risk and exposure. We think the undue hardship language is an important part to be included under current law with the Minnesota Human Rights Act as well as the ADA. It includes the language of reasonable accommodation, but it also includes the language of undue hardship. And we think having those together, there's a whole body of case law then what really helps determine what is meant by reasonable accommodation, and that includes the undue hardship language. So we think if you include both those together, you then also have that whole body of case law that will go with that and really will help them clarify what is meant with this language. And so you don't have to now kind of create new case law to determine what is meant by reasonable accommodation. We also have an employment law attorney here, and I think it would be very beneficial if you could hear from him as well.
He's got a minute and a half.
Thank you.
3 minutes, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Ryan Mick. I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota Employment Law Conference to speak in favor of the undue hardship concept, and I'll try to limit my comments to not repeating what has already been said, but to add some additional points. And again, I'll highlight that for just a moment. This is a well-established principle in every other reasonable accommodation legal scheme that I'm aware of, not simply related to disability, and no one is here to suggest that pregnancy is a disability, but this concept of undue hardship is built into the Minnesota Human Rights Act as well, which obviously is not limited to disability. A couple of additional points. This is fundamentally about balancing the reality that accommodations should be granted, but some accommodations simply are too difficult and burdensome for employers to give. The bill right now is not limited simply to minor things. The language would allow for litigation over something much more than breaks, seating, and the like. So there's some uncertainty there. But the concern that we have is to ensure that if a accommodation is too burdensome, and that could be a matter of cost, it could be a matter of burdening coworkers, that the courts are able to balance those issues if necessary, which they are able to do under every other statute. A couple of additional points. This is not an additional burden on employees, to be clear. Under existing law, the burden to demonstrate an undue hardship falls on the employer. So this is not an attempt to impose something additional on employees. It is an opportunity for an employer to carry a burden to say this is too difficult, too expensive, or too burdensome to coworkers. It's also important to recognize that undue burden accommodates employers which are not identical. That is, some employers, that is to say, what might be an accommodation that's reasonable for one employer is not necessarily going to be an accommodation that's reasonable for another. That is, a smaller employer, for example, may be more burdened by the same accommodation than a larger employer. And so the courts have established case law that makes clear that they should look at multiple factors, including the financial resources of the employer, how many employees are at issue, the organization, the structure of the employer, and what the particular accommodation would impose upon that employer. So this really is an effort to balance the importance of providing accommodations to employees, but also recognizing that some are simply too burdensome. That's not to say that there will not be other reasonable accommodations, but some may be unduly burdensome for certain employers. So it's an effort to balance and ensure fairness for both sides of the discussion.
Thank you. Representative Kiefer.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just ask the author if she would be accepting to this as a friendly amendment.
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Kiefer. I first want to address the first part of your amendment regarding the deleting 12 months and changing it to 6 months. My concern with that portion of it, I think, is this is, of course, talking about parental leave, so an opportunity for both the mother and the father to take time off after a birth or adoption. And I think after the birth, specifically, you know, for obvious reasons, the mother usually takes time off immediately following the birth, but then perhaps the father wants to take time off after the mother goes back to work. So I think having the flexibility of having a little longer time frame and leaving the 12 months in place as opposed to the 6 months, I would prefer for those reasons. To the second part of your amendment regarding the undue burden defense, I wish I would have had some time to review what the case law was in Minnesota surrounding that definition. I did meet with the chamber a little bit earlier today, and what I said to them was I was concerned with not knowing the interpretations of undue hardship at this time. It sounds like there's substantial case law out there, and I would be interested in learning more what that law says regarding the definition of undue hardship. But as stated earlier, I think that the current language regarding the reasonable accommodations, and additionally on line 11.7, where they may provide the accommodation requested by the employee or an equally effective alternative. So we're allowing the employer the option of alternatives for accommodations as well, which is in the language. And so I guess at this time, Representative Kiefer, I would have to oppose your amendment for those reasons, but I am interested in actually looking at some of the case law to see what those interpretations are, and maybe going forward we can consider some changes that the chamber and business community would be more comfortable with.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Rep. Melin, and I will definitely work with you on that, and I will withdraw the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kiefer. Seeing no more amendments, we have a few people that wanted to have their time to speak to the committee. We have, we'll go a little over because we have the room, and I know that, but if the witnesses can keep it relatively brief. Tara Duncan and Leah Ohm, two citizens. If you could come down. Please identify yourself for the tape and proceed, and the other witness can get in her chair while you're getting started.
Hello, my name is Tara Duncan. I had a baby in October of 2011, and I returned to work 5 weeks later in November of 2011. I had previously spoke to my employer about my intentions to nurse my baby and the need for 2 short breaks during the workday. Didn't seem like it was going to be a problem. So on the day that I returned to work, I did take those 2 short breaks, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Because I'm not the type of person just to stand around, I took the initiative to take our scheduling book back and a telephone and a notepad and paper so I could continue to answer the phone, schedule patients. I did make him aware that I was doing that. At the end of the day, I told him that that's, don't worry about phones not getting answered, I was answering the phones and scheduling patients. To which he replied, "You're answering phones while you're doing that?" So my second day at work, my second day back, I did the same thing. And the night before my third day back at work, he called me up at home and told me that he decided he wasn't going to let me take those breaks anymore. I didn't know exactly what to say. I told him that I didn't think he could do that, that I thought I had rights and that I was going to check into those rights. I was the breadwinner in the family, so I didn't feel like I had a choice. I knew I couldn't quit my job. And I wanted to nurse my baby. So I kind of felt like I was forced to give that up. But I have to say, when he called me that night and I was trying to, I guess I argued with him a little bit and said that I thought that I had the right, and he told me, don't worry about not being able to pump, your body will adjust to it. And anyway, so I returned to work the next day, and he let me go. He said, based on the conversation that we had last night, I've decided to let you go. That was it. I went 2 months with no income. So it was pretty devastating to the family. But I got to nurse my baby, I guess, on the bright side. So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Could Christina Hansen get ready to testify after? I'm going to believe that this is Ms. Ohm.
Yes.
Please introduce yourself for the tape and proceed.
Mr. Chair, representatives, my name is Leah Ohm, and I'm here as an advocate on behalf of 20 young women that I've been working with to help pass the Women's Economic Security Act. As a women's advocate for 10 years, I can say without reservation that the only way to achieve equality for women in the United States is by improving their economic lives. That's what's made the Women's Economic Security Act so desperately important for my group of friends. Each of us has experienced, either firsthand or through a friend, the economic cost of being born female. One of the women in our group today, who I'm speaking on behalf of, she couldn't be here, named Danny, was working at her first job in high school, and this was about 5 years ago, when she confronted that cost. She was 15. She didn't have the savvy of a more experienced worker. So when a new male employee was hired and she asked him what he was paid, he told her. She found out she was making significantly less than he was, even though they were the same age, in the same job, and Danny had broken multiple sales records and been named Employee of the Month. When she went to her manager to question him about the pay discrepancy, another mistake new workers often make, he told her, "If you ask me that question ever again, I will fire you." That, Danny said to me, was when I realized how little I was worth to the world as a woman. My parents actually worked double shifts waiting tables to get my father through grad school in the midst of raising 2 young kids. And in the first few months of my little sister's life, my mother had to sit in a dirty restaurant bathroom pumping between shifts to ensure that my sister had the nourishment she needed. Reasonable accommodations would have gone a long way. If either my sister or I got sick, my parents didn't get paid. These stories are not uncommon. They are not women's stories. They are family stories. And they don't scratch the surface because, honestly, it's 1,000 times worse for my sisters of color. In our state, if you are Latina, you can expect to lose nearly $1 million over the course of your career because of the pay gap. Latinas are more likely to be the primary breadwinner in their families, so that pay gap destroys generations of upward mobility because someone's mother happened to be born brown and female. These experiences are real for women in Minnesota. This package would clear the way to a more equal playing field, and I urge you to support the package in its entirety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Holm. Ms. Hanson?
Yes.
And the next on the agenda, the next testifier would be Heidi Grizel. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the tape.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Christy Hansen,
and I am here representing myself. I am so excited and a little nervous to be speaking with all of you about the Women's Economic Security Act.
It's okay, we eat witnesses.
Oh, great. That helps. I'm so excited for this bill primarily because I am a woman, and it directly and positively affects not only me, but my sisters, Leah, my friend, my mother, your daughters, and by directly and positively affecting women, you have a great influence on children, their families, which ultimately means that you have an amazing influence on their immediate communities, on education, and ultimately it all works for the betterment of Minnesota. Now, for the past 6 years, I've been working in childcare. I've worked as a nanny, a tutor, and eventually I made my way into the field of early education. And for the past 18 months, I've been living and working in the Twin Cities as an early education teacher. And in those 18 months, I've had 3 different jobs at 3 different early education centers. And the reason for that is it came down to the fact that I could no longer afford to keep my job. Historically, early education is dominated by women. Women are always working in these positions, and on average, they're only making about $10 an hour with little to no benefits. As a single woman with no dependents, I myself was having a horrible time trying to make ends meet under these working conditions. I can't imagine how difficult it is for a pregnant woman or a woman with a family to support themselves, making this pay or earning this pay and with little to no time off. I have seen pregnant women and women with families struggle intensely just with time off to stay home with a sick child, medical emergencies, all because they are so desperately worried about their financial security and their job security. I've seen women work up to within hours of giving birth for a child and rush back to work after giving birth to that child because they can't afford not to. I truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to keep your families happy and healthy. I would greatly encourage you all to support this bill in its entirety, and it would honestly work towards a stronger Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
first of all, it's great to hear some passion and compassion from young people in Minnesota. It's great to have them here. Our next testifier on the list, Ms. Heidi Gavel, she actually had to leave. She was here most of the hearing, but she had to attend another meeting. She's the CEO of Bank Cherokee, so she, of course, has other business endeavors to attend to today, but her testimony was going to primarily be that Bank Cherokee is independently operated and one of the oldest family-owned banks in the metro area. She is the CEO. A lot of what's encompassed in the Women's Economic Security Act they're already doing at their business, and she believes that it strengthens their business rather than being a detriment to their business, and she was here to testify in support of the bill. And I'd also like to direct members, especially Representative Fabian, to a letter in your packet from a proud business owner in Roseau and Hallock, Minnesota, who is supportive of the Women's Economic Security Act as well, and you'll find that in your packet. I think we can bring the other testifiers up that were scheduled for after Ms. Kessel.
I think the next on the list is Catherine Melin and Ellen Ewald. And it makes me feel really good that I'm banking at a pretty good bank. Please identify yourself for the tape. As I say, members and members of the audience, we're probably going to go 5 or 10 minutes over. So hopefully you can all hang out and hear the testimony, because I want to make sure we get everybody in today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. My name is Catherine Melin, and I'm the Policy and Outreach Coordinator for the Minnesota Catholic Conference, the public policy voice of the Catholic Church in Minnesota. MCC wants to ensure that women have access to a workplace that supports family, economic security, and motherhood, and this act is an important step towards these goals. We are grateful to those who have moved this legislation forward and would like to offer our support, and specifically for 3 provisions in this omnibus bill in particular, HF 2371, HF 2259, and HF 2461. The Catholic Church insists that women have unique gifts to offer society that contribute to the growth of a healthy culture, and ensuring the participation of women in the public sphere is a valuable part of this growth. Simultaneously, we also need to acknowledge that women have the biological capacity to bear children, and with that, the responsibility to care for and raise these children. Therefore, a woman's public role or profession needs to harmonize with and not dominate her role as a caretaker and a mother. Pope Francis recently asked, how is it possible for women to increase their effective presence in many contexts within the public sphere, in the world of work, and in places where the most important decisions are made, and at the same time maintaining their presence and preferential and entirely special attention in and for the family? This will come about more easily if we as a society can reconceptualize the meaning of caretaking work in the home. Studies have shown that women who are mothers prefer to work part-time in flexible work environments or stay at home for at least some of their child's formative years. Therefore, we would also applaud more comprehensive efforts to foster women's economic security by compensating women who work in their homes as caregivers. This could be done, for example, with small tax breaks for caregivers and credit towards future retirement benefits. Still, we need to support all mothers, even those who are working for any number of reasons, including for financial hardship or their status as single parents. They need to be supported in their decision to take responsibility of motherhood, regardless of their work status or economic conditions. Parenthood is a beautiful gift and a great sacrifice that must be encouraged and not made harder by unnecessary economic or professional burdens. The three provisions in this act that I mentioned in particular provide important assistance to women and families as they struggle to balance their roles as parents, the needs of their children, and their workplace goals and professional responsibilities. First, this act, among other things, expands unpaid parenting leave from 6 to 12 weeks and allows for greater pregnancy accommodations to be given for conditions related to pregnancy and childbirth. Second, increases enforcement of existing workplace protections for nursing mothers. Third, it allows earned paid sick and safe leave to cover medical needs and care of family members. In conclusion, we are encouraged by this initiative to foster women's economic security and look forward to participating in further legislative initiatives that advance the dignity of women and foster economic security for families. And I'd just like to add that I've really been encouraged by some of the other testimony that has been talking about how important it is to keep in mind that this particular act goes a long way towards fostering economic security for families and helps for the betterment of Minnesotan society in general. So we're really excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen, Ewald? Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the tape if you could.
Thank you. My name is Ellen Ewald, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm here as a citizen who believes strongly in the importance of ensuring gender equity and eliminating retaliation in the workplace. My life has deeply been impacted by pay inequity and retaliation here in Minnesota. I grew up in Hopkins, Minnetonka, Minnesota, and went to Hopkins Lindbergh High School. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Minnesota and graduate work in Norway and at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I moved to Norway on a permanent basis in the 1990s and lived there for more than 20 years. In Norway, I held several positions, but for the last 13 years prior to my return to Minnesota in 2008, I was a business executive and worked with a variety of companies, many with ties to both Norway and the United States. I've always been interested in research and education and business. When I was offered a job in Minnesota at the Honorary Norwegian Consulate, helping the Midwest and Norway to interface in research and education, including business ventures, I was absolutely thrilled. I believe this was going to be my opportunity to really do something of value for the two countries I love so much. I was hired as an expert in higher education and research. I understood I would be working as part of a team, side by side with another employee who was an expert in business development and innovation. The postings with the job descriptions for the two expert positions were very similar. I was wooed to come back to Minnesota with the promise of a parallel and equal position with my teammate. When I was offered the job, I was told that I would be paid the same as my male peer. Unfortunately, my peer was offered a job at 42% more pay than me. It was clear that this was meant to be kept a secret from me, but I ultimately discovered the truth. I learned that the other expert male employee was not only paid significantly higher salary, but he received better benefits than I did. His spouse and children were covered by insurance, but mine were not. Having lived in Norway for a long time and appreciating the progressive and egalitarian nature of Norwegian society, I was sure that the consulate and the embassy would rectify this unequal treatment. So I brought the pay and benefits disparity to the attention of the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Washington, D.C. Despite the strict prohibition against unequal pay, discrimination, and retaliation against women contained in Norway's own gender equity laws, embassy officials told me that this is the way it is, and that I should just accept it. I couldn't believe it. And frankly, some days I still can't. Instead of being helped, I was threatened repeatedly. At one point, the now honorary consul general told me that there would be consequences, and someone would likely have to go if I didn't stop complaining about unequal treatment. Nonetheless, I continued to raise my concerns throughout the embassy and with leaders in Norway. I felt I had to, not only for myself, but for others working for the embassy. Sadly, my problem was never fixed by the embassy, and I had to resort to litigation. Pay inequities should be avoided or corrected immediately when discovered. No one should have to go through years of fighting to get fair treatment and incurring tons of attorney fees just to be treated the same. It's not fair that women have to fight so hard and long for justice. I hope this package can help other women get fair treatment right from the start of their jobs. I will not give up. This is not only a women's issue, it is a family issue. Things do not change without a concerted effort. Feeling discredited like I was is a terrible place to be. Starting out excited about your job and the difference you can make, and then being deflated by knowing that someone who is supposed to be your peer is treated so much better than you are. It feels even worse when in your gut you know that the unfairness is about your gender, something you cannot change. I didn't really understand what it felt like to be viewed as unworthy before this experience. It made me question myself in a way I'd never done before. I asked myself, what's wrong with me? What did I do to make this happen? These kinds of feelings impacted me not only in my work life, but everywhere else as well. It made it really hard to trust others in the work situation. Retaliation is a reality. Suffice to say, no one should have to go through something like I did. You here in the legislature can make a huge difference for women. This package is a great start to bringing other employees online with the state for its own, If there had been a law on the books that required my employer to report on how things were doing on pay equity, the embassy would never have been able to get by with paying two similar positions so differently. I now firmly believe in this state or any place else will not be. I apologize. I feel so passionate about this. I get a little bit riled up. I now firmly believe women in this state or any place else will not be paid fairly unless employers are closely watched to ensure that there is fair payment, regardless of gender. Women should be able to work without the fear of retaliation. We've been talking about fair equity since I was in college almost 30 years ago. Yet women are at about the same rate of pay compared to men as they were that long ago. Please stop and fight against this unfairness. Please support this package. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ewald. Appreciate it. And don't worry, passion around here every once in a while does happen. We've had about a half an hour of testimony and support. I know there's at least two people that wanted to speak with concerns, not opponents, just but with concerns. So I want to call down Beth Canoon and Ben Gerber and give you at least 5 or 10 minutes, or however long you need. Well, actually, no, we won't do that. And then we'd really get to be good friends, and that wouldn't be good for your career.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you. Representative Mahoney, I know you always enjoy when I'm in front of your committee. I think when you said you eat testifiers, you meant us, but I think we're here on actually two serious issues to raise two serious concerns. I'd like to draw your attention to, I think it's line 12.24. It's Article 4 of the bill on family caregiver. I just wanted to start out, I'm actually, I have a 5-month-old daughter. I'd show you pictures now if I could, but
Somebody scare that child early?
yeah, actually it was we ran into Representative Mahoney the day before my wife went into labor, so I told him he was scary enough to scare the baby out, but and I actually did tell him that. But
which line was it?
Well, it's the first issue. Well, before I get into that, I just want to say, I mean, I under this statute, I would qualify as a family caregiver, as would most anybody in this room who has any family or even friends. The way this works out, and I just feel from a personal level that this is a broad expansion of current law that we believe is unworkable. I don't think that my status as a family caregiver raises to the level of protection that we are about to put into law, which is equating it to race, religion, sexual orientation, things like that. And that's what we're doing with this law. And I think there's a serious concern. This applies to male and females equally. This is not restricted to a gender. I think on line 12.28 to 12.29, just the definition alone is difficult from a legal perspective, and I just think from one of the things we're trying to do here is make laws so that the average person understands them. I don't know what someone living in a familial relationship even means. I don't know if we couldn't find a legal definition of that. So I think just taking that out. I know the Senate did some good work on the definition of this. I think we think the definition in the Senate language is a lot better. It's more clear. Under this, we're not really sure what that means. Obviously, blood marriage or legal custody, that's easy to define. We could find that relevant statutory definitions. I think the second is the remedies. Like I said, we're now raising, and almost anyone in this room, I know I qualify for this, to the level of protection that we give people based on their race, religion, and there's a list in the Minnesota Department of Human Rights statutes. And when we do that, we are now giving a really burdensome issue for employers in the sense that if somebody is terminated for cause, the concern is, well, if they came in late one day because of their because they had to drop their kid off, they're going to claim that was one of the reasons that they were terminated, most likely. And I think anybody who's been in a situation I know have where I've come in, they could probably claim that. And I think what's important to recognize is that this is really going to hurt small businesses the most. The small businesses that can't afford an attorney, you heard from an attorney before. People that are charging $200 to $300 an hour, or even an attorney that's newer and is charging $150 just to answer a complaint or respond to a Department of Human Rights claim. We're talking thousands and thousands of dollars, and if it goes to court just to file a motion to dismiss, we're talking $10,000. And so we're really opening up small businesses, I believe, to really disastrous consequences. And I understand the intent of the bill, but I just think really with the definitions and then with the remedies, which are serious triple damages and attorney's fees, we're really encouraging a lot of litigation. And I think in an unsession, when we're trying to streamline our laws and we're trying to make things easier, Representative Mahoney mentioned that the businesses are doing well. I think this is one area where we're really going to put the brakes on this and make it a lot harder to hire. And we're really opening up a broad definition. This is a lot different than race, religion, gender. We're talking about a new protected class, and we think it's unprecedented. It would be really burdensome. And I appreciate your addressing these concerns.
Ms. Canoon.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name again is Beth Cadoon with the Minnesota Chamber. Once again, thank you for inviting us up to speak on this bill. As was mentioned, we're not opposed to the whole package here. We just have concerns with some of them, so we appreciate being able to address those. I want to thank the chair for one of the current concerns we already addressed or talked about was that pregnancy accommodation language in Article 3. Appreciate the author's willingness to work on language with this section to see if we can make sure this is as clear and concise as possible, so we appreciate that. The other item I'd like to flag is in Article 4, dealing with the nursing mother language. This is another one that we hope we can work with the author further on this. Currently in law, there is no remedy for nursing mothers and the accommodations that are done. We are certainly not opposed to providing a remedy. Our concern is with the remedy that is provided under this section. which provides for a remedy within the Human Rights Act. Our thought is there might be another remedy that would provide a clearer and quicker sort of recovery for both the employee, so it can be addressed much quicker for the employee as well. And so we hope that we can work with the author on that provision as this bill moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. There was one more testifier, but we're just about out of time. So I am going to make my apologies to Laura Kirchner and say, give this time over to the author for any closing remarks or the committee. Any remarks from the committee? Any remarks? Representative Lohmer.
Thank you, Chair Mahoney, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative, for bringing this bill forward. We talked just for a couple minutes at the beginning of the session. I just have a little bit of uncomfortableness with Article 4, line 12.22, 12.23, and that just talks about the human rights violation. I think that's what Mr. Gerber was talking about as well. But I would feel a lot more comfortable if we would put this into Dolly, a violation going into Dolly, and I think I understood you to say that they have maybe already made this amendment in the Senate, so you are willing to look at this. Is that true?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From my understanding in the Senate, yes, they did adopt language that would put this under the purview of Dolly as opposed to the Department of Human Rights. And I did discuss this with the Chamber earlier. My concern with the language that they adopted over there was no specific remedy available to the person if they were, say, terminated for nursing. The remedy that was available in the language that the Senate adopted, I believe, would be a $1,000 fine to the employer, but I didn't see that the employee would have any remedy available, and so I'm happy to continue working with the Chamber to see if we can clarify what the remedy would be for the employee. But it is my understanding the Senate did adopt the language that the Chamber would be more comfortable with, and so I think taking a closer look at it and maybe find something in between.
Representative Purcell, you had a question, briefly?
Briefly, Mr. Chair, thank you. And I wanted to clarify something I heard earlier. A young lady was talking about that this issue goes back 30 years or thereabouts. I don't remember who the testifier was, but coming from where I come from, I just need to say it goes back more than 100 years. And remember 1918, and no, that was the year my mom was born. And I've expressed to some know that my mother was a women's liberation person before they even had the words. And, you know, women didn't get the right to vote because there were a lot of men who didn't think they should have that right. And I think we have some of that going on here now, and, you know, men in the audience, you know you need to put on your big boy pants and deal with this, because our mothers and daughters and sisters are going to have this opportunity, and let's just move it forward in a good way, and thank you for bringing the bill.
Any closing comments, Representative Melin?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't know how I follow that, but I just want to thank all the testifiers that were here today who told their personal stories and how this could have helped them in the past, and more importantly, how it can help people in the future. And even those who were here to testify to some of their concerns, and I look forward to continuing to work for them. And although this is called the Women's Economic Security Act, I think we know from the testimony here and from just real life experience that this is really about strengthening working families and strengthening households. So I just want to make that point clear, and I appreciate the hearing today and would ask for members' support. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Melin. Just remember, if it goes over to Dolly, I have control of Dolly. That's a scary thought. Seeing no further comment. We'll take a vote now. All those in favor of re-referring House File 2536 as amended to the Committee on Ways and Means, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. I guess you're on your way to Ways and Means. You have a couple of things that people wanted. I hope your testifiers remember that. And as you said, you're willing to take a look at and work with people as it moves forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Yes. Members, we are not adjourned. We will... Hey! This committee is not done. We have a full list of bills tonight. I strongly suggest people get dinner. We have the broadband bill. We have a whole bunch of other bills. And we will reconvene at 6 o'clock in this room. So, having said that, we stand in recess. Or the call of the chair, in case we get done at the... we actually have this room, so I'll make it the call of the chair. And if we get done with session early, we'll come back.